Hello everyone and welcome. The release of Call of the Mountain has given us several interesting decks, but one in particular has captured my attention and is now picking up steam across the wider Runeterra community. My name is Scarzig, and I'm here to give you the breakdown on how to Nightfall. To kick things off, we need to go over the core cards and play style of Nightfall. Of course, we have the poster children for the deck, Diana and Nocturne. Now, when it comes to Diana, she is a bit of an odd case regarding the way other champions in the game are played. You don't really need to prioritize leveling her up quickly or keeping her alive. Simply use her as an early removal tool against key units on the opponent's side to keep her getting snowballed on. As long as she can snipe something important on the enemy side, or pull a large unit to the side that would otherwise block a wide swing with your fearsome units, she's done her job. And she has the bonus utility of sometimes granting you extra copies of Pale Cascade. Next up we have Nocturne, who is going to be the main finisher for the deck. He is going to be more important to your win condition than Diana is. You don't need to prioritize leveling Nocturne up while he is in the deck or before he comes into play. Typically, you will level up Nocturne as you are swinging for lethal, because the level up condition of attacking with 5 or more Nightfall allies does include Nocturne himself, and as long as you play your cards right and prioritize getting a wide board, you'll level up Nocturne on that same turn, and then the AoE fearsome will kick in for you to get the lethal. Try to use the initial Nightfall play effect of Nocturne to grant vulnerable to a key enemy unit and snipe it the same way you would with Diana. One of the main workhorses of Nightfall is going to be Lunari Duskbringer. This is your primo 1-drop. You want to try to mulligan for this in your opening hand whenever you can. And the Dusk Petal Dust is a 1-mana spell that discounts the next Nightfall ally that you play by 1. So it essentially allows you to convert your spell mana into unit mana, which can be very helpful. With Nightfall, you need to try to float mana whenever possible, and then Lunari Duskbringer is going to allow you to convert that into unit value for later turns. Nightfall is all about building up those pieces and then having these large value turns. Lunari Duskbringer is also a fantastic unit to duplicate with Fading Memories, or maybe even grab off of Stalking Shadows. Next up, we've got Stygian Onlooker. Now, this card is really interesting because this is not really a 1-drop that you want to play on turn 1. Even if you are attacking first, typically you want to make sure that the 4 damage potential that's packed into this card is going to connect with the enemy nexus. So simply play it with its Nightfall on defense to just have something with 4 attack that disincentivizes your opponent from attacking you, or only playing it when you know that a fearsome unit will be able to connect with the enemy. Turn 1, 2, and 3, especially against decks that are playing very small chump blockers, can't really handle the Stygian Onlooker, and it can result in some early free damage. In a similar way of Stygian Onlooker, we also have Solari Soldier included in the core cards of the deck. Remember, to gain Solari Soldier's Daybreak effect, it needs to be the first card you play during that round. It gains +1/+1, and so try to save this for your defensive turns, to just have a 1-mana 3 attack unit to block your opponent's aggression, or keep this in your opening hand if you have the attack token going first. Even if this is in your opening hand, if you aren't attacking, you might not necessarily want to play the Solari Soldier. It can still be used as a blocker against maybe something like a Jagged Butcher or Cytheria of Cloudfield, however. Solari Soldier is also an excellent way to open up your turn with just a decent play and then trigger the rest of your Nightfalls when you're trying to set something up. Next, we're getting into the main damaging units of the deck. We've got Lunari Shadestalker. Because this card has elusive, you do want to try to play this as early as possible so it can get that continuous 2 damage over and over and over again against the opponent. Against certain other aggressive lists that are running elusive units, Lunari Shadestalker can also provide you some much needed defense. This is also going to be a fantastic unit to duplicate off of Fading Memories or perhaps Stalking Shadows. When you are using Stalking Shadows, save your ephemeral copies for defense, and if you do get ephemeral Lunari Shadestalkers, try to save those for additional offensive turns or for setting up your lethal swings. Now, Crescent Guardian is a very interesting card where if you're able to draw many copies of this, you can get in tons of damage. It functions the same way as Stygian Onlooker in that if your opponent's playing a lot of small units, Crescent Guardian will be putting in tons of work. Do not be afraid to play this as a 3-mana 3/3, however. It has the Overwhelm no matter what. The Nightfall only grants it extra attack power. Because it can potentially be a 3-mana 5/3, the ephemeral copies of this card are also fantastic on defense because you can block some really large units or champions with it. And finally, to round out our core units for Nightfall, we've got the All-Star Doom Beast here. Its Nightfall effect drains 2 from the enemy nexus, meaning it deals 2 to the opponent and then heals you for 2. This is going to be the card that you're going to look to duplicate most often with Fading Memories, and is always a solid pick to grab off of Stalking Shadows. The burn allows you to go over top of a lot of decks, and then the healing is just going to give you so much sustain and ways to delay the game while you get those combo pieces and try to finish off your opponent. And moving on to the spells, we've talked very heavily already about Fading Memories and Stalking Shadows. These cards are going to be used as burst enablers to open up your turn so you can immediately start playing your Nightfall units without passing the priority to your opponent, and then just doubling down and tripling down on your win conditions. Don't forget, with Fading Memories, it can be cast on enemy followers, so keep an open mind regarding what you might be able to use from your opponent's side of the board. Even something like a Fleet Feather Tracker can be saved for later on to have a challenger unit to pull something out of the way, for example. Fading Memories also has additional utility with units that have Last Breath effects. So maybe you can grab your opponent's Cursed Keeper, play it as an ephemeral unit, and then you'll get your 4/3 Escaped Abomination right away. Moving on, we've got Unspeakable Horror. Important to note that Unspeakable Horror is Nocturne's champion card, so if you do draw multiple copies of Nocturne, you can gain additional copies of this spell. It drains 1 from anything, so that's simply going to heal your Nexus for 1. Same thing as Vile Feast. But it does have another interesting effect. Nightfall, create a random Nightfall card in hand. So a Nightfall card is going to range from any of these units, even to the spells like Pale Cascade. It cannot create champions like Diana or Nocturne, of course, and it does not create copies of itself. But it can grant you some other cards not listed here, such as Dusk Rider or Cygnus the Moonstalker, to give you some finishing potential. It's not incredibly important to activate the Nightfall on this effect to generate a card, but it is important to save it for specific targets. You might want to snipe something like a Fleet Feather Tracker or a Young Witch, or maybe you use it to pop a barrier or a spell shield. So try to keep an eye out for opportunities like that, and who knows, maybe Unspeakable Horror will generate a win condition for you. An interesting line that can happen is Unspeakable Horror into Lunari Priestess into some large celestial win condition like the Destroyer. And finally, we've got Pale Cascade. This card is fantastic. It sees play even outside of Nightfall decks. 2 mana burst speed, granting an ally extra attack power, and then +1 HP in order to maybe survive a removal spell or a trade is just enough. And it also will draw you a card when you play it with its Nightfall ability. Never play Pale Cascade without drawing that card unless you're trying to protect your Nocturne or the trade is just fantastic for you. And same thing with Doom Beast. Never play Doom Beast unless you get that Nightfall effect. And to finish things up, I wanted to leave you all with some tech cards and finishers. These are going to be the cards you'll look at first when you're looking to tweak the deck for the metagame or make it suit your playstyle even further. Spacey Sketcher is a very interesting card, very skill testing, because not only do you need to select the proper invoke for the situation, you're also going to be giving one card up out of your hand. This is a great way to cash in gems from the Gift Giver or Mentor of the Stones, or maybe the ephemeral copies you've been generating of your other units across the course of the game. Gift Giver is a fantastic 1-drop that generates a 1-mana burst spell very similar to Lunari Duskbringer, and you can basically consider Gift Giver as additional slightly less synergistic copies of that card. Mentor of the Stones gives you great offensive utility, really great targets for it in the deck like Diana or Nocturne or Lunari Shadestalker, and if your opponent does kill it, which they kind of need to, the gems that this creates gives you, again, that burst Nightfall utility that the deck loves so much. If you're looking for some additional healing and card draw, Guiding Touch is the perfect answer. You can think of this as sort of additional copies of Pale Cascade. The healing goes a long way towards more aggressive matchups, and then just being able to draw an extra card here or there is just super solid for a deck like this that wants to always have options and gather combo pieces. Frenzied Skitterer is another fantastic option against aggressive decks, especially ones that go wide. You won't be able to combo this with Nocturne the way you might expect, because it is a little bit hard to fit into those big turns at 3 mana, but it's just a great defensive choice nonetheless. Shroud of Darkness is another very interesting spell for the deck. It looks like it should be an auto-include in the list already, but I found that the spell shield is, again, going to be more of a tech choice. This will allow you some additional protection for your big setup turns with Nocturne. You would ideally want to wait for your opponent to spend their mana, but a smart opponent is going to make sure to hold those specific cards like Hush or their healing in order to disrupt your combo. And finally, we've got Lunari Priestess. I mentioned this very briefly in the previous section, but you can also main deck these if you'd like the additional utility. Really great card in slower matchups. This can find you some additional outs that you can use to close out the game with. On the far right, we've got our finishing cards. Cygnus the Moonstalker, I talked about briefly. We also have Atrocity in here. This card is an odd inclusion for the archetype at a first glance, because it's only going to be dealing, 4 or 5 damage on average. It's not going to have those crazy highs from the atrocities that we're normally used to seeing, the ones that are going to be hitting They Who Endure or Nautilus or Ledros or something. So if you keep finding that your wins are 4 or 5 damage short, or your opponent might be removing your units a bit too easily, then Atrocity might be the finisher for you. I've also seen some Nightfall pilots experimenting with Sun Guardian. This has a similar vibe to Solari Soldier, where it's just a really big unit to play to open up your turns, or just on defense. That gigantic overwhelm is going to give you similar burst results to Atrocity for finishing off your opponent. All right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today. Hopefully this guide has provided you with a better understanding and foundation for the Nightfall archetype. Don't get discouraged when you're starting out with this deck. Even with this guide, it does take some getting used to in order to figure out when you can float mana, how much damage you can take. These are things that are only going to come with experience. So again, please don't lose hope. Just play and just try to analyze your own gameplay, and you'll be a pro Nightfall player yet. Thank you once again for tuning in. I'll see you next time, and you have a good one.